Hello and welcome to Cairns Catches Up. Tom Cairns, your host, where we speak to guests within the motorsport world about their careers, the challenges they face, and perhaps the advice they can share on young hopefuls wanting to work within the motorsport community. Now, today's guest is someone who has been around in the motorsport broadcasting world for well over 30 years. You love him through the British touring car side of things, through Formula One and other motorsport scenes. It's a Mr. Ben Edwards. Hello, sir.
Hi, Tom. Hi, good to hear from you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. How has everything been with you? Because I think the last time we spoke or we saw each other, I think it was the Goodwood Festival of Speed in 2023. I saw you wandering around in the paddock, and it's just almost like, "Hi Ben," that type of thing. But no, it's brilliant to have you on the show. And what have you been up to recently? Because we've not really seen you as much within the Formula One world. I know you were involved with Channel 4 and a little bit of F1 TV stuff, but maybe the last couple of years, what exactly have you been up to?
A mix, really, a bit of a mix of things. Goodwood is definitely one of them, the main things I'm doing. I'm doing all three major events at Goodwood, which is fun. It goes out online, it goes out on TV, and the variety of machinery and people that you see at Goodwood and that you can talk about is utterly remarkable. And sometimes it's so hard to catch up with everything that you need to know. There are three major events, as I say, two on the race circuit, which are more the historical events, and then, of course, the Festival of Speed, which goes up the hill climb. A lot of that is display work, and there's a lot of modern machinery in that as well. So it is fantastic. It is so much to get your head around, but I really enjoy it. And so Goodwood's been a part. Formula One I've been involved in to a certain extent. As you say, I was doing some stuff for F1 TV. I did Silverstone for them last year again. And I did a couple of stand-ins for Radio 5 Live on Formula One last year. So it was nice to have a sort of keep a bit of a connection with Formula One, which, I loved doing. I chose to step away from it, but it's lovely to still have a bit of an involvement, mixing it with other things. And it was quite a varied year because I ended up doing Le Mans as well, which was quite fun for Eurosport and some other events. You mentioned I used to do British touring cars. I actually ended up commentating for the track, so just on the track commentary for Snetterton, which is quite close to me. I live up on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and so I did touring cars last year. So yeah, it was quite a mix of things. And then at the end of last year, I ended up doing the first Formula E race of the new season, as a stand-in as well. So yeah, I sort of see myself as a bit of a stand-in. If I can help and do a one-off, then that's fine.
A very versatile man that you are as well. Many different championships commentators over the course of a calendar year. It's quite tricky to keep up with it for any commentator because you can commentate on so many different championships, whether it be real life motorsport or within virtual motorsport. It's kind of it's tricky to keep up to date with absolutely everything with different championships that you're doing, isn't it?
I totally agree. Yeah, and it is quite difficult, so trying to get into Le Mans, not having really covered much of the other WEC stuff, and then suddenly I got a sort of late ask to do Le Mans. That was a big one to get into. I enjoyed it, and it was good. It was sharing it with other people who had a lot more detailed information. But just getting your head around the entries, the drivers, the lineup for Le Mans because it's a big, big entry. But it was great fun and a really enjoyable thing to do.
Going back to where it all began for you, because you didn't begin as a commentator, you began, I think it was racing or mechanicking to begin with. I think you raced in Formula Ford, which I believe you were successful in before going to win the Formula First Championship and winning the Caterham Vauxhall Sports Car Championship. And you raced against the likes of David Coulthard and Mick Hakkinen during those days, didn't you?
I did, yes, in Formula Vauxhall Lotus. So yes, I came through single seaters, and a lot of those guys were racing at the same time in Formula Ford or Formula Vauxhall Lotus, which was a slightly bigger step up, and it went around Europe as well as in the UK. It was a good formula. They did better than me in that, and quite rightly, they carried on their careers building up to the top. I got to a point where I was struggling a little bit to make my performance work. It was a mixture of things. But that was at the same time. So that was in the sort of early 1990s where I just began doing a little bit of commentating at the track at Brands Hatch, actually, because I used to be an instructor at Brands Hatch. And I used to just see if I could help out a little bit. And Brian Jones, who was the main commentator there, he was very helpful and giving me a little bit of help on and advice and getting me going a bit on commentating. That's kind of where I started out.
you've grown up in a different era to many of us have done in how we follow motorsport, what has got us into motorsport in the first place. How difficult was it for you to find your feet within the motorsport community to lead you to where you are now?
I think actually getting involved in motorsport for me was because I started as a mechanic, and you mentioned that briefly. When I was in my early mid-teens, about 15, I started helping out with a Formula Ford team that did all their racing at Brands Hatch. And I knew nothing really about motor racing at that point. I grew up loving cars, but I hadn't really got involved in motorsport. But working as a mechanic and going to all these events as a help mechanic and then a bit more of a proper mechanic as I developed a bit more, it got me thoroughly involved in motorsport and meeting all the people who were racing, involved in running things. And then because I became an instructor quite young and was going racing myself, it motor racing became my world. I mean, it became my world from an early age, really. So so when I then started commentating, and really the reason I started commentating was to try and show that I could talk about motor racing and help sponsors be happy, sort of thing. Um, but because I wanted to carry on racing as far as I could. But in the end, that being a commentator was something that started to develop and went well for me, and I started enjoying it. And of course, I was already so immersed in motorsport at that point. And yes, I hadn't been involved in the top levels of motorsport, but seeing drivers like McNish and Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard go from where I had been at the racing front to stepping up the ladder to the high point, it sort of gave me confidence that if commentating was my thing, then, keep going with whatever.
And soon Eurosport came around the corner as you became their F1 commentator in 1991, I believe, because they did have the rights at the time, as well as when uh, BBC had the rights to show Formula One on terrestrial television. And how was that
Yeah,
experience for you? Go on.
yeah. Well, it's just that they got it then, although I wasn't doing it initially for them because I didn't start doing stuff for Eurosport until it was around that time I did the first few bits for them. Um, but it was a couple of years later when they'd been having it for a little while that they decided, got in touch with me, having I'd done a few more motor racing stuff for them, and they said, "Would you be up for doing Formula One?" Which was, a fantastic thing. And then I did 1995 and 1996 for them with John Watson, and so that was a complete, yeah. I mean, that was a complete change for my life, and at that point because I got that opportunity, I that was when I really did. That was the point actually that I decided, right, you're not a racing driver anymore, you're a commentator kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I had been racing up until that point as well as commentating, but at that point, because we were being sent to all the races and it was being done properly, that I felt well, you just got to concentrate on this now. This is your thing, and that's what I did.
Yeah, and of course, Eurosport lost the rights. I think after 1996. After then, you
Yeah.
went to Champcar to do commentary for. How did you find that, and what made it different for you compared to doing the Formula One stuff at Eurosport?
Yeah, so doing Eurosport Formula One was very good. Working with John Watson, it was a very simple system. There were no sort of presenters who would put it on show first. We would just intro with pictures of where we were, get straight into whatever the event was, whether it was practice or qualifying or the race, and then see who won, and then move off. So it was very straightforward. Going into Champ Cars was fun. I enjoyed that too because I was traveling to the events, going over to the States, and the paddock in Champ Car was very friendly, very easy to communicate with, good to catch up with people and learn what was going on. A little more easy than in Formula One, although in the mid 90s, Formula One was then easier than it is now in a way to really make contact with people. Now it's so media huge, which is totally understandable. It can be a little bit more difficult sometimes to make those connections in the same way. But Champ Car was lovely it was very easy to do that and make those connections. And it was good racing, fun mixture of ovals and racetracks, of course, and street circuits. So it was an enjoyable part to do. And there were some great drivers. Alex Zanardi was one of the top drivers at the time. Of course, his Formula One career didn't quite go as well as it did in Champcar, but he was such a great talent, and various other drivers that were fabulous to commentate on.
It wasn't before long before he had his infamous accident, which we all know what happened as a consequence. And more recently, he's been involved in the Paralympics in Rio, where I think he got a gold medal in wheelchair. What do you call it again? I can't remember the name of the event that he did, but I'm sure he got a gold medal in the Paralympics in Rio de Janeiro. You might know the answer to that. But
Well, he got involved in a lot of that stuff. I mean, I remember him winning Brands Hatch on the Olympics because that was when they actually finished off the event at Brands Hatch, amazingly. But then, of course, he had that other injury, and that has affected him more. So yeah, been a bit of a tough time.
yeah, I can imagine. And so there was Sky Digital in 2002, which you were also involved in, which was interesting actually because it only lasted for one season and then that fell by the wayside. And it was on to British touring cars after that, where I felt you were beginning to make more of a name for yourself within the motorsport community, and your enthusiastic commentary to everyone's eyes for those on ITV at the time. It was just splendid. And I think that's what got your name out there more to people.
Maybe, yeah, maybe because it was on ITV, and it was that was great fun. I really enjoyed doing touring cars. It was a fantastic time to do it, and I really enjoyed traveling around doing all the major British events. It was certainly one of my highlights. Um, and by then, I had applied a few times to do more Formula One, but it just wasn't coming together because it was going off in different directions. And but I was thoroughly enjoying doing the British touring cars. I was doing other stuff as well. A1GP turned up not too long after that, a bit later on. But yeah, that was entertaining to do as well. That was traveling around the world with a series based on the nations as to which nation would win the championship, and that was another good one. But British touring cars, I think, has always been a wonderful form of motorsport.
Yeah, A1GP came around, and I think we saw more of the sort of comedy duo of you and John Watson. And
Yes.
I think that's one commentating pairing that will always stick with me. How was A1GP for you? Because that only lasted for 4 seasons before it liquidated. But I think in terms of the cars itself, uh, it was great to drive, I'd imagine, from what James Hinchcliffe has had to say about that. But I think what contributed to the liquidation was how far in debt they were. And I can't remember the name of the engines they had for the first 3 seasons, but they switched over to Ferrari engines, which were a more expensive package style because it was an all spec series, was A1GP. Where do you think it went wrong for the championship itself?
Um, Sadly, it did go wrong. It was a complicated business, really. I think the reason it went wrong, the development made life, I don't know quite why, but it did make it more difficult. There was financial awkwardness as well. So it was a great shame that the series just didn't survive. Because it had been doing well, but yeah, it just sort of started to fall apart, sadly, and it couldn't be held together by the people that were in charge of it. And so sadly, it came to an end, which was a great pity.
Yeah, it was a great pity indeed. And you carried on commentating on the British touring cars until 2011 before BBC came after you for 2012 to work alongside David Coulthard in the commentary position. How was the transition going back to Formula One after doing British touring cars for so long?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, working with the BBC was very good, of course. Mark Wilkin, the producer, was very helpful, and it was back in the Formula One world. And the Formula One world was different, there's no doubt. By the time I went back to it, more media, more packed, more understandably. But it was wonderful to work with David, to be a part of the BBC team, and to go to the events and just sort of take it on. And it was a surprise when they got in touch with me because by that point I thought, nah, it's not going to happen, Ben. The F1 thing, it's not going to happen for you. It happened briefly in the past, and then suddenly it came along, and yeah, I sort of threw myself into it and got into it. It took a little while, I felt, to actually become involved totally a part of Formula One. It's such a intense world, Formula One, and the people who are in it regularly, are working flat out all the time, whatever they're doing. It doesn't matter what your role in Formula One is, it's always tough. It's always absolutely full on. Absolutely right, because it's the top level of motorsport, and for everybody, whether you're involved in a team or whether you're involved in journalism or whether you're involved in media of other forms uh, or putting an event together, event organizers, everything in Formula One is at the highest level, of course. So it does put pressure on you to a certain extent. It took me a little while to feel a little more relaxed in it because it took a bit of time to just feel, right now I am part of this. Initially you feel a little bit outside it. It takes a little while to feel you're back inside. But I was helped by the people I was working with, there's no doubt, because people like David Coulthard, like Mark Wilkin, they were very involved already, and other people that I worked with as well. Steve Aldous, who used to travel with me from this part of the world, Norfolk, Suffolk border. He'd been involved for many years as well, so he knew everybody in the paddock, almost a very friendly guy. And so I did manage to get, back into it quite quickly. And of course, it's all about the racing at the end of the day and commentating on that. And that was something very natural to me, and I enjoyed it.
Mhm. And BBC for 4 years showed half the races live. As Sky
That's
Sports said,
right.
it's exclusive deal. Then Channel 4 came around, taking over BBC's rights, if you want to call it that, because BBC had lost the rights for it in 2016. And I think it was just kind of where it left off, really, wasn't it? It kind of
Yeah.
effectively the same team, but just under a different station.
Absolutely. Yes, it was effectively the same people initially. But yes, it just sort of moved over slightly. So that worked fine too. Yeah. Yeah, it was good.
Excellent. And you were around until 2020. You stepped down full time. You did come back for a few races, I think, in 2021, but I think that's partly because of Billy Munger contracting COVID at
Yeah,
the time, and the people he was with at the time had to self isolate, and that's where you came in for the 2 rounds in Austria, wasn't it?
that's right. Yes, yes. So that was a slightly odd one, yeah, and I felt for them. But the COVID thing was all a bit weird, wasn't it? So I was able to help out a bit there. Um, and yeah, so that was good, and I had good connections with everybody there. But it was very much my decision that I decided to step away. But it was great that if I could help, then I could help, and that was useful. Mm.
You were involved in selected races within F1 TV, given they've been around, I think, since 2018 now. But in 2022, which is around when I first started working over at Formula One, you were around for some of the races, weren't you? How was it from your experience working within the Media and Technology Centre in Biggin Hill? Because it must have felt different and looked different compared to the Sky Digital days or the digital days back in 2002.
Yeah, although it was interesting going back to Biggin Hill, of course, because I'd done that whole season in 2002 when Bernie Ecclestone was running it. And then, yes, it was different when I came back I did quite a few races in that 2022 season from Biggin Hill. And yeah, it worked well, and it felt like going back to where I'd been, even though it was a different setup. It was, more um, professional setup inside than it had been before. But of course, it's a similar thing where I'm not traveling to the events, but I'm absorbing everything from the people that are there. So you would have people, F1 TV people who are actually on site and giving you information, but then you're just absorbing it all and commentating it from a distance. But I do find, because people ask me sometimes, can you really commentate the same when you're not actually at the event? And actually, you can pretty much most of the time because we are focused on what we're seeing on the screen. And often, actually, in the early days, you have to be a little wary not to see something out of the window of your commentary box, which cannot be seen on camera. You can then perhaps just sort of mention it, but don't go too mad about it because if people can't see it, they go furious, because they've got to be able to see what you're talking about. So it is very much the focus is on the screen and what you're seeing. So being in Biggin Hill was still meant that you can still do it very effectively. And so I enjoyed that. Yeah, it was a good season of doing some of those. I did nearly half of them actually that year, because Will Buxton was doing quite a lot of them that year as well. It was a change of plan. They were trying just experimenting a little bit with it. And I did enjoy doing it. That was fun. Worked with a few different co-commentators. That's always interesting. In fact, John Watson came back for one of those as well, which was quite amusing.
I think it was
Um,
Miami. I think it was Miami that he
yes, it
did it with
was.
you. But yeah,
That's
uh,
right. Yes.
and since Alex Jakes became the permanent F1 TV commentator
Mm.
from 2023 onwards, you've been involved in a lot of other stuff. You mentioned Le Mans as well. I mean, you're not doing the whole 24 hours, you're just doing selected hours of the event. But when you look at the scenery of the Circuit de la Sarve, I assume you were over at the Circuit de la Sarve, unless
It
you're
was,
working.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
How just describe the event as a whole when you're witnessing cars going through day to night and then back into the day again.
It is a huge event, and for the people who for fans, it is wonderful, and seeing fans in Le Mans, it is fascinating because some of them are obviously very addicted to the racing, to the cars, to watching on track. Others are out just having fun, doing other things, and there's lots going on around Le Mans where they can sort of have just playtime almost, as well as watching racing. And it's so as an event for as a whole weekend, some of them are camping, some of them are just enjoying the weekend. The fact that there's a race on in the background for some doesn't mean so much. For others, it means everything. So it's a real lovely mix, and it's a long event. Um, this one I commentated on was actually really good as well because we had more cars on that final lap on the same lap than had ever been before, still battling for the win. So it was a very good one to do, and I think Le Mans is a very special event. There's no doubt about it. It has always maintained that over the years, and they're keeping it going very, very effectively. So it was good to be there.
Putting everything together of all the championships you've commentated on, which races do you feel most proud of to have commentated on?
Well, there's a bunch, of course, and often it's to do with the ultimate levels when you're getting towards championships being decided. And that's often when the excitement builds up and you get all this drama about what's going to happen next. So, yeah, I mean, in all sorts of different forms of racing, it has often been exciting just getting those build-ups. I mean, for example, what that first year I did for BBC 2012, um, was a Vettel championship winning year. But it wasn't straightforward at the end of the season because Fernando Alonso was giving him a lot of pressure. And it was really very, very tight, very close between the pair of them. So it did go down to the final round, which was in Brazil then, not in Abu Dhabi. And it proved to be a fantastic race, especially when Vettel had an incident on the first lap. He could have ended up retiring out of that race. But in fact, the car was not badly damaged and he managed to make it through to the sort of position he needed to be. It was a reminder, even though I hadn't commentated on it, of course, was when Lewis Hamilton won the title in Brazil. And it made me smile a bit this year, or end of last year, end of 2024, when Brazil again produced one of the most amazing races, when Max Verstappen took that victory in the wet last year. And although he didn't win the championship that day, effectively, that performance and what happened to Lando Norris was almost the step that he wanted to take the drivers' championship. So Brazil has always been a really exciting one to go to, I find, and that 2012 end of season race was a particular one. But there have been plenty of other great races. I mean, for example, when I was doing Champcar, some of the venues we would go to would be a big part of that. Laguna Seca, California, is a fantastic venue. Lots of ups and downs, tricky corners, some of them, but it always gives me a lovely view of the Champ Cars, and the area around there is a really great place to be as well. So that was always very interesting to be at Laguna Seca. When we were doing A1 GP, for example, although there were ups and downs with that category, it took us to some really interesting places. For example, New Zealand never had some recent or modern Formula One, but it had A1 GP in New Zealand at one of their circuits. And there were plenty of other countries around the world where they were taking A1 GP, and it was really, again, fascinating to see you're going to these different places, different parts of the world, which perhaps can't hold Formula One. They don't have quite that level, but but for A1GP, it was really interesting. Yeah. So there's been so many highlights over the years of commentating. That it's hard to sort of come down to just a few because I've had such a lucky time of it, you know.
You've been involved in narrating the official season reviews. I think the last one you did was in 2017, but I think the
Hmm.
first one you did, I think it was the alternate version of the official season review of 2001. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I remember working on it, and that was another thing at Biggin Hill that we used to do. I used to come down to Biggin Hill at the end of the season and go through. It was basically it had been scripted by some really good people as to what was summarizing the season then, and it was a really enjoyable thing to get involved in. And of course, those early 2000s with Michael Schumacher's dominant form was very, very impressive. And but it was yeah, that it sort of was something I used to really enjoy doing, those end of season summaries. It sort of fell away eventually because in the modern world it doesn't fit in quite the same way, does it?
No. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you on those season reviews because I've been saying this to a number of people already. The whole point of an official season review within Formula One is to show the championship from a different angle to what you've
Yeah.
seen live. That's why I loved it so much. But obviously now it's just you're basically using the international feed to put together the highlights of all the races, really, which is a bit of a shame. But I think
Mm.
just going with the times of how people watch Formula One nowadays, with how it's being shown digitally as well, they show the highlights on the YouTube channel, so it just goes to show how much times have changed.
Yeah, absolutely right. No, life has moved on and different things appeal in different ways. But it was a good one. And as you say, it was I like the way it was put together as well and enjoyed commentating it and sort of telling the stories that were more because you understood the stories by the end of it. That would help in a way, putting it all together to make it even more fascinating all the way through and picking out particular highlights and things like that. Of course, nowadays. In a way, I suppose the Drive to Survive series has found a way of doing that in its own way, because people will be looking back at Drive to Survive for the previous year and picking up on some of the major elements that they have then put together for each episode.
Mm-hmm. And you look at the co-commentators you've worked with so many different ones over the years. Which one do you feel most privileged to have worked with, would you say?
Gosh, most that's a tricky one, really. Most privileged because I've always felt privileged by working with some really top people over the years, and yeah, it's I don't know if there's anyone that I've felt sort of the most privileged for, but I have really enjoyed getting a different response, different reaction from different commentators. You get a slightly different element from different co-commentators, depending on what their skill is, or what their involvement is, and I think that's always really, really interesting. And so, I mean, yeah, I've been very, very lucky. I mean, David Coulthard always did a fantastic job. John Watson was good as well. And we had, a decent relationship that lasted, as you say, because we did A1GP again and then on and off over the years. So I've known him for a good long time. Um, and it is enjoyable working with some top people who've been behind the wheel of a race car and giving you that expertise, that view that is so important to what we're seeing, trying to give us a little bit of an explanation of what we're seeing from that point of view. So yeah, I have been very fortunate working with some great people over the years.
Fantastic. You look at Formula One now, where it's in a good place commercially and on the sporting front. Heading towards the engine regulations in 2026,
Yeah.
what do you think needs to improve within the sport to make it a better experience for the audience, would you say?
A better experience. Well, I mean, actually, when we look back at this last year, obviously it was an incredibly competitive year, wasn't it? And latter part anyway, early part was not. Um, I think uh, I with the change in engines, I understand that Formula One has to look forward in terms of how it performs, how it delivers power, how it does it in a way that is trying to be more eco-friendly. Um, and I totally understand that it has to do that. But every time you change the rules in Formula One, you're always likely to end up with a situation where one or two teams are on a slightly better step than some of the others, which is why, in some ways, I always like this period that we're into now, where you're coming to the very end of a rule system because all the teams are pretty much working out what they need to do, in theory anyway. And you get this very close battle between them, which when we go into the new series in 2026, I'm not sure that will happen, but the changes have to be done, and the Formula One has to move on. There's no doubt about it. Champ cars, for example, sometimes, or modern Indy cars, sometimes have been a bit slow to sort of keep up with things. And I think it's very important that you keep on moving forward with the technology and with the world, because otherwise people will lose interest in what they're looking at. In terms of what the cars, I would love to see them that little bit lighter. I know they're working on that, trying to make the cars a little lighter. I'd love to see them a little bit smaller, to be honest, just because in the old days when I used to commentate on Formula One and the cars were definitely smaller, lighter, more lively to watch. That was part of the fun of watching the cars being driven at the very limit of what they could do, dancing around the track almost sometimes. If you look back at some of the wonderful videos of Senna or all sorts of people, Gerhard Berger even in a car, then you would see lovely dramas, which nowadays with these more modern, slightly heavier, slightly bigger machines, you don't see it in quite the same style. So I would love to see them lose some weight, but we know safety is, of course, such a major, major part nowadays, and the implementary rules to look after driver safety, that is part of the weight of the machine. There's no doubt about it. It has to be. And so it is a balance. It's a balance that has to be worked on all the time, but I would love to see them a bit smaller, a bit lighter.
The 2025 season is fast approaching at the timing of recording. What are your predictions for this season then? Because we've got a radically changed grid. The calendar is reasonably the same, effectively. I mean, the beginning of the year is different with Australia being the first race, and you've got China, Japan, and then Bahrain and Saudi Arabia being pushed back because of Ramadan. What are your thoughts for the season ahead? What are you thinking?
Well, I think for all of us, it's quite a an exciting start to the season. A little bit unpredictable, of course, because the strength of the various teams as we went through last year, and yes, Red Bull took the drivers' championship with Max Verstappen, but with McLaren taking the constructors' championship, then it was lovely to see that battle going on. And of course, Ferrari were a key part of that for a lot of it. They were battling McLaren right to the end. Didn't quite get it back, but it was still very impressive. We've got Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari, the man who's taken so many titles in his career, but still wants to try and get another one. Um, I think 2025 has a lot to offer, and not just because we've got the great experience, the great talent of someone like Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari, and we've still got Fernando Alonso, one of the most experienced Formula One drivers in the world. But we've also got some newbies coming in, which is lovely, and I'm really looking forward to seeing these youngsters coming in, like Andrea Kimi Antonelli coming in, especially when he's going to be part of Mercedes. Jack Doohan also coming into it as well. Oliver Behrman getting a full run with it now. Isaac Hadjar also going to be a part of it as well. So and Gabriel Bortoleto from Brazil. So I think it's really lovely that we've got so many good people who are a part of this, who are trying to develop their careers, whilst we've also got some of the most experienced ones at the top level as well. So across that, can I predict? No, I can't. Who's going to win? It's almost impossible to tell. And even when they go testing, I used to go sometimes to the testing, and you used to be able to see which cars were working, which cars not. But certainly in more recent years, that's become harder and harder because the teams play their games of how much weight they've got in the car, how much fuel, or just how much power they're putting in at this stage. They can play with it so much that it's really hard to predict until we get to the first few races. It can be very hard to predict which car, which team has really got the setup at their best to start the year. And as we know now, like Verstappen and Red Bull last year, they had it top of the level at the beginning of last year. But when we've got 24 races now, there can be a development through that can change everything.
Now, the Goodwood Festival of Speed, Ben, an event that's been going on since 1993. What makes it so unique about the event? Because I've been a couple of times now, and I have to say, it's a lovely time for the family to get out there to see so many cars, whether that would be on show or whether they're going through the hill climb. It's just an astonishing event.
It really is. It is a remarkable place. It's a fairly tight, narrow little hill climb, and but it's everything else that's around there. They put on so much displays, shows, equipment. There is so much to enjoy, and as you say, for families, it really, really works. You can see full families coming along, youngsters. Um, Men and women all enjoying it in different ways. It's lovely to see that. Um, the Festival of Speed, it's a long, long process because it goes through from Thursday, Friday into Saturday, Sunday, and it builds up as well with the one element, which is the competition element, which is the sprint up the hill. And they get a batch of fascinating machinery from the very early years to, of course, very recent years that are probably likely to do the winning, but they can win in different classes. So that's great. But it is this sort of mixture of both the heritage of cars, of motorsport as well, and motorbikes as well, right up to the very most recent. So nowadays it's almost like a car show in that some of the manufacturers will launch their vehicles at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, because nowadays we don't quite have the London Car Show or other car shows in quite the same way that we used to. And the Festival of Speed has almost become one of those that you get some of this incredibly modern machinery, and yet we're also celebrating history. And now, for example, this year or last year, there was a big Formula One element in that it was a celebration of Red Bull, and a big part of the Red Bull team was there, some of the top people, and driving cars up the hill. This year, it's going to be a real celebration of Formula One because it's 75 years now since the Formula One World Championship began. And it's going to be a fantastic opportunity, I think, to really enjoy the history of Formula One as well. So it really goes across so many different zones that it can amuse and appeal to many, many people. When we were there last year for the Red Bull one, seeing the fans crowded around the paddock area, it was a particular area for the Red Bulls. How busy it was there was just remarkable.
As well as the Festival of Speed, there's also the members' meeting and the revival. Just describe those events, just in case those who are wondering, what are those events? I mean, they may have heard of them in terms of the name of the events, but what exactly goes on in those two?
Okay, so the members meeting, which is early in the year in April, and it's at the Goodwood circuit. So Festival of Speed is not at the circuit itself; it's up the hill climb by Goodwood House. But the members meeting and the revival are both held at the original Goodwood circuit, which first began in the late 1940s and ran through with current racing until the mid 1960s. And so the idea really is the members meeting is very much about people who are members and to celebrate people who are fans of Goodwood and have been loving it, whether they've only just joined as youngsters or whether they've been involved in it for many, many years. And so there'll be a lot of historical elements to the members meeting, but there'll also be other things that are perhaps a bit more modernly interesting too. Not very recent, but other elements. For example, they'll be coming up with GT3s this year, which have been around for sort of 20 years now, which is lovely to see. So the members meeting is a very sociable event because you have to be a form of a member to be able to go along to the events, and it's very accessible, very easy to walk around and see people, see the cars, the vehicles that have come along. When you go to the revival in the latter part of the year, that's an even bigger event. It's open for everybody, very popular as well. And they use more of the Goodwood sort of venue outside the circuit itself, across the road and other areas where they set up tremendous other displays and opportunities for fun for people to enjoy. Of course, at the revival, it is very much celebrating the actual Goodwood period. So the cars that are there are very much cars that were able to race during that Goodwood period of late 40s to mid 60s. And people are also recommended to wear clothing from that period as well. It is very defined on that period. And it's fantastic. It really is very enjoyable. It gets busy. It's a lot of people. It's become incredibly popular, but it really is a major, they're both major events.
Fantastic. Out of all the circuits you've been to for many different championships over the years, which circuits have you enjoyed going to the most? I know you mentioned the ones over in Champcar, but which other ones have you most particularly enjoyed going to?
Yeah, well, I mentioned Brazil. That's definitely one of the ones. Sao Paulo is definitely a good one for me. Um, In terms of other, I mean, Spa has always been a key one for me. I did race at Spa a couple of times, and being there with Formula One, or being there with anything, to be honest, whether it's sports cars or whatever, Spa in Belgium is a wonderful venue. Yes, it's big and well spread out, but it is very not everybody loves it because it's not right next to a busy town and there's a little village next door. But I really like it. I think it's a lovely race circuit. So Spa has always been a very good one for me. Um, Other ones I very much enjoyed that Melbourne actually, and it'll be nice to see it starting this start of this year as well on the street circuit. It just feels like a very suitable beginning. It always feels like a very good starting point for Formula One. And going to Melbourne, going to Australia, being able to catch up with a few friends and family as well in the past was always useful. But it's just a lovely venue and I really enjoy going there. So there are so many great events. Suzuka in Japan for me too is one of my favorite circuits to commentate on and to watch Formula Ones go around because it is demanding, it's tough. The drivers have to really get it right, but it is incredibly fulfilling when they do get it right. Yes, it's hard to overtake around there, but just watching them get it get the car working perfectly around Suzuka is such talent to do it, and I love watching that.
Back on to you. What does the future hold for Ben Edwards? Have you got like any books or any shows coming up involving you? What have you got in store?
I'm going to be doing a fairly regular podcast, funnily enough, after Formula One races. That's coming up this year. So that's going to be a nice one to just talk about Formula One uh, as it develops through the year, as it goes on. So that's a nice one. I will be doing the Goodwood events again this year. So I was down at Goodwood last week, just learning a little bit more about what they're planning to do. Um, and other ones, I probably will do a little bit of Formula One again, perhaps for Radio 5 Live. It's all we're waiting for things to be sorted out exactly. But I will be involved in different things, and I'm very much, as I say, there as a stand-in. If I can be helpful, if something comes up, then I'm happy to stand in.
You've been involved in the broadcasting side of things for around about 30 years now, if not more than that. What would be your advice to those wanting to work within the motorsport community, particularly within the media? So whether there be commentary or being involved in journalism, content creating, what would be the best piece of advice you could give to like young hopefuls? Because motorsport is different now compared to when you were very young, like in like your 20s or something. But what would you give? What would you say to them?
Yeah, it's a challenge because, for example, the other commentators that I've met over the years who have been involved, particularly at a high level, have come from all such different directions and different elements of life sometimes to get involved in what they're doing. It does vary enormously. I think ultimately to be involved is about the passion for what it is. If you have that passion for the sport, that is what encourages you. It's never easy. Whatever level, it's like when I was trying to be a racing driver or and then get into trying to be a commentator. It's never easy because there are many people who are trying to do the same thing. But the passion that you have for it is crucial. And I think that is for me the most important aspect. Make sure that it is something that really, really matters to you and try and I do feel it's important to immerse yourself into it in as many ways as possible. And I know that's not always easy. We can't all go to Formula One when it's very expensive just to go if we're not actually working there. But get involved in other levels, at lower levels of motorsport. See if there are other things you can get into, and then sometimes there will be steps up the ladder. So that's what I would say.
Ben, it's been brilliant talking with you, and I have to say it's wonderful to share your moments within your commentary days and perhaps maybe your racing days as well beforehand, and the advice you've given to those wanting to work within motorsport. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to have you again in the future on Cairns Catches Up.
Thanks, Tom.
No problem. Thank you very much.